Thank you for stopping by the St. James Show. I am your host, St. James, where I bring you the gospel according to St. James. Today, we want to get into an interesting article that I came across from the New Yorker magazine. It chronicles the relationship between Mayor Eric Adams and the infamous Bishop Lamor Whitehead. It's a very interesting article, and all I'm going to do is read it to you. It's very long, so you don't want to read it yourself. Just allow me to read it for you. And as always, you can always like, subscribe, share, comment, donate to support the channel. We always have to put our disclaimer up. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, commenting, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. And we are doing all of that today by reading and commenting on this article. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The title of the article is How Eric Adams Started Mentoring a Con Man. And the pretext of the article reads, Why did New York's mayor take Lamar Whitehead, a fraudster, Brooklyn church leader, under his wing? About a year ago, not long after Eric Adams was sworn in as the mayor of New York, an old friend and church leader named Lamar Whitehead went to an auto shop in the Bronx to drop off a Mercedes-Benz G-Class SUV that had been in a crash. Whitehead led a small church in Brooklyn called Leaders of Tomorrow International Ministries. People called him Bishop. The shop he visited, No Limit Auto Body, was operated by a man named Brandon Belmonte, who was involved in real estate. Federal prosecutors would later refer to Belmonte as a businessman. The Mercedes was a $25,000 job. Belmonte paid the $13,000 bill for a rental replacement while the work was getting done. Whitehead wanted more. He basically says, "You got to give me another 5 grand," Belmonte recalled. I said, "Bro, the job was only 25,000. 13 and 5 is 18. The parts were 7 grand. I'm gonna make zero." It occurred to Belmonte that Whitehead wasn't trying to negotiate. He was asking for a kickback. He promised to make it worth Belmonte's while. "I got the city hall in my back pocket," Whitehead said, according to Belmonte. Whitehead explained that he was close to Adams, going back to when Adams was Brooklyn Borough president. He told Belmonte that Adams had once offered him a $50 million construction contract. "Eric's doing big things," Whitehead continued. I gotta get mine." He mentioned a property that Belmonte was developing in the Bronx. He said, "Eric Adams can make it a homeless shelter and you'll get city benefits," Belmonte recalled. Whitehead offered to broker a meeting with Adams. "He kept telling me we're going to make millions together," Belmonte said. And he said, "You got to give me the 5 grand or I'm going to beat you up." Whitehead, through his lawyer, denied this and other accounts of his actions described in this article. On a friend's advice, Belmonte called an investigator at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan. I said, "I think the mayor of New York is on the take," Belmonte recalled. And he said, "What do you mean?" The investigator patched in colleagues, and Belmonte told them his story. I said, the mayor of New York City is trying to extort me through someone else, he said. The next morning, FBI agents arrived at Belmonte's door. They asked Belmonte to call Whitehead and began recording. Belmonte told Whitehead that he was ready to do business with him and with the mayor. Since the early days of his political career, Eric Adams has had to fend off allegations of corruption. In 1994, when Adams, then a 33-year-old transit cop, mounted a long shot campaign for Congress, his opponent, Representative Major Owens, accused him of staging a break in at his own campaign office. That sounds familiar. Investigation into the matter. As chairman of the state Senate's Racing, Gaming, and Wagering Committee, a report from the state inspector general implicated him in a bid rigging scheme for a Queen's Rancino, a gambling and racetrack establishment. Adams maintains that the report was orchestrated by the Republicans. Some of Adams' rivals in the 2021 New York City mayoral race believe that reporters, constrained by the pandemic and distracted by a crowded field, didn't dig enough into Adams's background. We all know you've been investigated for corruption everywhere you've gone, Andrew Yang said to him during a debate in the Democratic primary. With Adams, though, it has sometimes been difficult to distinguish between the unusual and the unethical. For example, city records show that he had a woman named Sylvia Cowan purchased, him and a woman named Sylvia Cowan purchased a one-bedroom apartment together in 1988. When the city, a local news website, asked Adams' 2021 mayoral campaign whether he still owned the property, the campaign claimed that Adams had gifted his half to Cowan. Later, Adams amended 15 years of financial disclosure forms to reflect that he still owned half the apartment. He blamed his former accountant, Clarence Harley. Harley had gone through some difficult times, Adams said. I had an accountant who was homeless, he explained. I let him continue to do his work, even when he lived in a homeless shelter, and because of that, it caused him to make some bad decisions. It came out after the primary that Harley hadn't simply fallen on hard times. Until 2017, he had lived in an affordable housing building in Harlem, where he did the books for the building board. The board discovered that Harley appeared to have siphoned tens of thousands from the building's account and had evicted him shortly thereafter. Harley could not be reached for comment. Of course not. Adams has dismissed much of the critical coverage he's received as racism. Black candidates for office are often held to a higher, unfair standard, especially those from lower income backgrounds, such as myself, he said, just before primary day, when the Times examined his past fundraising practices. The newspaper took a close look at the One Brooklyn Fund, a nonprofit that Adams controlled while serving as Brooklyn Borough president. The fund received donations from real estate developers, some of whom had business with the city. Adams denied any impropriety. I hope by becoming mayor, I can change minds and create one equal standard for all, he said. On January 1st, 2022, Adams was sworn in. He soon appointed to important posts an array of friends and close connections. Sounds like nepotism to me. For his deputy mayor for public safety, he chose Philip Banks III, a former NYPD official who had resigned in 2024 amid a federal investigation into favor trading and bribery. For his chief of staff, he picked Frank Carone, a Brooklyn Democratic Party power broker who has drawn scrutiny for his business dealings. He tried to install his brother to run the mayoral security at a salary of $210,000 a year. An ethics board forced him to knock the salary down to $1. He appointed Timothy Pearson, another NYPD friend, to be a senior advisor on public safety, even as Pearson continued to work an outside job at the same Rancino for which Adams had been investigated. Lisa White, the former treasurer of the One Brooklyn Fund, with whom Adams once shared an apartment, was installed as deputy commissioner for employee relations at the NYPD at an annual salary of roughly $250,000. Adams is hardly the first New York mayor to have dubious friendships, but Adams came into office with a special category of associates, men he had spent time with socially during his 2 terms as Brooklyn Borough president from 2014 to 2021. He has called a few of them his mentees. Among them are 2 brothers, Robert and Zane Petro. I'm going to say Petro. They have a long name. Who pleaded guilty to financial crimes in 2014 and who run a Manhattan restaurant, La Bea, where Adams and Mayor dines frequently. Where Adams as mayor dines frequently. Lamor Whitehead was also a protege of the mayor's, and he made sure everyone knew. In May, Whitehead claimed to have negotiated directly with the mayor the surrender of a man who was wanted for murder. Adams didn't deny this. He described the bishop as just one of many younger men whom he's taken under his wing. He's my mentor, Whitehead told the Post in May. We've done a lot of work in Brooklyn when he was the Brooklyn Borough president. He helped me out a lot. This was true. During Adams's time as borough president, Whitehead, a convicted fraudster and identity thief, used Adams' name to promote his church and to give a boost to his business interests. Adams, meanwhile, opened doors for the younger man, offering advice and inviting him to speak at high-profile events. I think it's important to hear from some of our young people. A young pastor, Bishop Lamor Whitehead, Adams said, introducing Whitehead at a press conference in 2017 in the wake of a hate crime. This past July, Whitehead made national headlines when videos of him being robbed during a church service while wearing what was reported as several $100,000 worth of jewelry went viral. The robbery prompted closer inspection of Whitehead's church. The city reported that a former parishioner had sued Whitehead, accusing him of stealing $90,000 from her after offering to help her buy a house. We all know that was Miss Pauline. Adams called Whitehead after the robbery to offer his support. He just encouraged me to keep my head strong, Whitehead said. Brandon Belmonte was not the first person to go to the law enforcement with the suspicion that Whitehead and Adams were engaged in corruption. Both men deny their relationship goes beyond that of mentor and mentee. Everybody is trying to connect me and the mayor with some fiduciary experience, Whitehead told me a few weeks ago. We don't talk about real estate. We don't talk about stocks. We don't talk about none of that. We talk about life. Some people who have worked with Adam suggested that his relationship with Whitehead is representative of a character flaw. The mayor is unwilling to distance himself from the people he's let into his life, even when it would be politically wise to do so. I have no experience of Eric crossing the line, a local politician said. That's different from the company he keeps. A few days before Christmas, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan announced that Whitehead had been arrested. Prosecutors in the office's public corruption unit said they caught him claiming to have influence at City Hall while trying to shake down Belmonte. Adams was not accused of any wrongdoing. Prosecutors said that Whitehead, while making his overtures to Belmonte, knew that he could not obtain city government actions he was promising. But it's not clear how the government reached that conclusion. A spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan declined to comment. When I asked a City Hall spokesperson whether Adams or anyone on his staff had been interviewed or subpoenaed as part of the investigation, the spokesperson referred me to the comments the mayor made after Whitehead's arrest. I have no comments on the federal investigation, Adams said. He called the allegations troubling, but he wasn't ready to wash his hands of Whitehead, as a politician might be expected to do upon hearing that an associate dropped his name while trying to extort someone. Adams said he would let the investigative process play out. Whitehead is 44 years old. He has bright brown eyes and a wide, engaging smile. He often spends several hours a day live, streaming on Facebook and Instagram, where he promotes his church and his luxurious lifestyle and denounces his enemies. Designer for days, he once said, giving his followers a virtual tour of his walk-in prayer closet, which was stuffed with clothing from Gucci, Fendi, and Louis Vuitton. Whitehead, who lives in a multi-million-dollar house in Paramus, New Jersey, advertises himself as an ascendant community leader in a multiplicity of realms: business, politics, religion, and entertainment. He said that one of his missions is to serve as an emissary between the streets and the church. In 2018, after the rapper Tekashi 69 pleaded guilty to making sexually explicit videos of a 13-year-old girl, Whitehead spoke in court on behalf of the rapper. Interesting. But he's talking about Larry Reed. Okay. Anyway, I digress. The bishop had to come through, 6ix9ine said in a video he posted on Instagram. We had a situation. That's interesting. I would love to know what that situation was. There are people all over the city who claim to have been conned, burned, harassed, lied to, or otherwise hurt by Whitehead. Many have reported Whitehead to the authorities, and several have come away feeling that Whitehead was protected by his relationship with Adams. I could tell he was name dropping again, using Eric Adams' name again and trying to discredit me. A pastor named Robin Brown wrote in an email to the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office in 2014, describing her attempts to report Whitehead to the NYPD. I have lost all faith in the system. Brown declined to comment for this article. I've tried to report him on several occasions at the local precinct, but to no avail. The Reverend Benny Custodio of Emmanuel First Spanish United Methodist Church in Park Slope, Brooklyn, wrote in a comment on a blog post about Whitehead in 2017. This cardboard bishop is currently at my church doing the same thing he had done in the past, using the church to fatten his pockets. He knows the system very well and uses it to his advantage based on the close relationship he has with our borough president, Mr. Eric Adams. Custodio declined to comment when I contacted him several months ago. He died in November. Many Brooklyn church figures, business associates, and former friends of Whitehead's refused to speak to me for this article because they say they feared him. When he got angry, you could feel that menace, a man named Brian Etta told me recently. Etta showed me documents indicating that in 2006, while Whitehead was working for a mortgage broker, Whitehead helped sell Etta's house in Brooklyn and then pocketed proceeds from the sale. City records show that the property was later transferred to a company controlled by Whitehead. In 2013, Etta volunteered for Eric Adams's first campaign for Brooklyn Borough president, and at Adams's inauguration, he spotted Whitehead at Brooklyn Borough Hall. I thought this was brazen, Etta said. A guy who wants to have an image of being squeaky clean, that this guy who is an actual, let me read that again. A guy who wants to have an image of being squeaky clean, and this guy who is an actual criminal? Not long after Etta met him, Whitehead was convicted of a startling fraud on Long Island, using information that he'd obtained from a girlfriend, an employee at a Honda dealership in Patchcue. Whitehead stole the identities of more than a dozen of the dealership's customers. He used those identities to purchase luxury vehicles. A prosecutor called it one of the largest identity theft cases Suffolk County had seen. During his trial, Whitehead got ordained as a pastor and wore clerical collars to court appearances. I don't fear you, he told the judge at his sentencing in June 2008, after being found guilty of more than a dozen counts of identity theft. I fear God. One of Whitehead's lawyers was Andre Soleil, a former Republican political operative. Soleil, who has lived abroad for several years, was disbarred in absentia in 2019 after being accused of bilking a Harlem nonprofit and stealing from escrow accounts he set up during real estate transactions. I will note that I've been merely accused, he told me when I called him recently. Soleil spoke with regret about the role he played in Adams and Whitehead's relationship. I introduced them, he said. A City Hall spokesman disputes this, claiming that Adams and Whitehead met at an anti-violence event with rappers on an unspecified date around 2014. But there are videos and photographs available online of Adams and Whitehead together as early as 2013. Soleil claims he is also a friend of the mayor's. Eric and I were close, he told me. According to Soleil, they met in the 1990s when Soleil worked as an aide to Rudy Giuliani in City Hall and George Pataki in the governor's office, and when Adams was still a cop, and for a time a Republican. Soleil helped organize fundraisers during Adams's first run for Brooklyn Borough president. An email invitation to a fundraiser during Adams's first Brooklyn Borough president campaign lists Soleil as a co-chair beside Tiffany Raspberry, a current senior advisor to Adams at City Hall, and Jesse Hamilton, who succeeded Adams in the state Senate. Soleil's legal specialty was real estate. Let's see, let's put them on hold. Let's start that. Soleil's legal specialty was real estate. He played both sides of Brooklyn's gentrification boom, representing both working class homeowners and aggressive real estate companies that flipped their homes. Whitehead, who for several years in the Ox worked as a branch manager for a real estate company called Custom Capital Corporation, was one of the few criminal defendants that Soleil ever represented. Whitehead was sentenced to at least a decade in prison, but he got out in the summer of 2013 after just 5 years. He would later tell people that his convictions had been overturned. He also said that he planned to get into politics. Soon after his release, Whitehead looked up his old lawyer and began hanging around Soleil's law office. Whitehead would visit Soleil at his office and ask him about technical, legal, and real estate matters. A few times, Soleil told me he came back to his office to find Whitehead there, without permission, reading documents on his desk. Soleil remembers a holiday party that he threw the year Whitehead came home in a restaurant in Cobble Hill. Soleil's Haddock's real estate investor clients and his black political world friends mingled. Soleil had invited Adams, who gave a speech. Whitehead, in Soleil's telling, had more or less invited himself. Halfway through the night, Soleil became aware that Whitehead and Adams were engaged in what Soleil remembers as an intense conversation. Shortly after that, he said it appeared that they had become best buddies. Soleil, along with others I spoke to for this story, believes that Adams saw something of himself in Whitehead. They were both charismatic, ambitious, and brash. They had both been raised by single working class mothers in the outer boroughs, Adams in Jamaica, Queens, Whitehead in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. Both had also experienced early run ins with the law. Adams was beaten in the basement of a Queens police precinct when he was 15 years old. Years before his identity theft conviction, Whitehead was charged with 2 counts of forgery in the third degree in New Mexico. The case was dismissed after he made full restitution to the victims. People close to Adams say that he's conscious of how easily his life could have been different had he not joined the city's police ranks. Lamor is like his ID, Soleil said. We all like our ID. Early into his friendship with Adams, Whitehead was living with a friend named Aurora Gordon, who had an apartment in an affordable housing tower in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. Gordon, a decade older than Whitehead, a cougar, had escaped from the World Trade Center on 9/11 and worked in the office of a tech company. In her spare time, she ran a small organization called Battered to Beautiful for survivors of domestic violence and other forms of abuse. Gordon helped Whitehead found a youth outreach ministry called Leaders of Tomorrow Brooklyn. They soon spun it out into an independent church. She thought that it was really going to be something big, and she thought he was an honest person, Gordon's sister told me. Whitehead, who is in his early 20s, had worked, Whitehead, who in his early 20s had worked small jobs in the music business and modeled streetwear, had a knack for getting close to famous and the powerful. He referred to the rapper Foxy Brown, a Brooklyn icon, as his cousin. On Facebook and Instagram, he began chronicling his encounters with musicians, boxers, actors, radio personalities, and with Adams, the new borough president. Publicly, Whitehead referred to Adams as his mentor. Privately, he called him E. In one YouTube video from 2013, Whitehead interviews Adams at an event in Bed-Stuy. We're going to do we're going to be doing a lot of things together, Whitehead tells him. Thank you for being a patriarch for our Black community. Thank you for being an advocate for men. Whitehead and Adams met up at concerts, bars, and red carpet events. Gordon told people she knew that Whitehead often got out of bed in the middle of the night to go see Adams. Let me take a drink on that one. Let me read that again. Whitehead often got out of bed in the middle of the night to go see Adams. With Adams's help, Whitehead connected with other politicians, people in the business world, and NYPD officials. Whitehead and Adams got together at Woodland, a restaurant on Flatbush Avenue where Adams liked to hang out after work hours. Woodland was the first restaurant run by the Petro brothers, who now run La Bella. Remember from my story earlier. This clique didn't exist when the mayor was in the state senate, a consultant who worked for one of the Adams rivals in the 2021 Democratic mayoral primary said, talking about the scene at Woodlawn. It formed around 2013. That was a year that Whitehead got out of prison and when the Petro brothers were indicted by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn for conspiring with others to launder phony insurance payouts through shell companies. They later pleaded guilty to lesser charges. Whitehead told people that Adams planned to appoint him to the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, and Adams asked community figures, political operators, business people, and religious leaders to join a committee called Leaders of Tomorrow, run by Whitehead, which met on at least one occasion. In politics, you run into everybody at the same meetings and stuff, one attendee remembered. This gentleman, Lamor, was new to a lot of us. Whitehead's appointment was so obviously wrong, the attendee added, that it could not have been a mistake. Brooklyn Borough President is a lofty sounding title for a relatively limited position. It's what remains of the office of the mayor of Brooklyn, a position that existed before 1898 when Brooklyn was still its own city. Today, the job is largely ceremonial. During the 8 years at Borough Hall, Adams issued proclamations in honor of Whitehead's friends, relatives, and connections in the music business, including Foxy Brown, who received a key to the city from Adams and Whitehead. Adams would declare July 31st, 2016 to be Leaders of Tomorrow Brooklyn Day in Brooklyn in honor of Whitehead's outstanding contributions to the community. A few weeks into his first term, Adams hosted a morning meet and greet at Brooklyn Borough Hall with local business leaders. City authorities later found that the event broke local political fundraising rules by soliciting contributions to the One Brooklyn Fund. The night of the meet and greet, Adams co hosted an event with Whitehead at a high school in Bed-Stuy, advertised as One Brooklyn event honoring Black History Month. Whitehead would use the One Brooklyn name for his own events and in various promotional materials. A City Hall spokesperson told me that the One Brooklyn Fund never gave money to Whitehead. Among a borough president's remaining powers is a say in land use and real estate matters, such as neighborhood rezonings. In 2014, a community activist named Alicia Boyd hosted a meeting in her home to organize neighborhood opposition against a proposed rezoning east of Prospect Park, a proposal that Adams supported. They wanted to turn Empire Boulevard into Times Square, Boyd said. The night of the meeting, Whitehead showed up at Boyd's house along with roughly 10 other people. In Adams's name, they shouted the event down. He just carried on, he and his friends yelling and screaming, Boyd said. They accused her of being anti-Black and of selfishly standing in the way of the first Black borough presidency in Brooklyn's history, even though Boyd is Black herself. Pamela Yard, who also attended the meeting, remembers Whitehead signaling the end of his group's pro-Adams intrusion with martial discipline. It was like a scene from Malcolm X, she said. He did like a hand signal, and they all turned around and they all walked out. So they found Adams to be a surprisingly cautious borough president. He treaded carefully. Perhaps he had his sights set on City Hall. Whitehead was an exception to this rule. I thought that my friend Eric Adams went out of his goddamn mind, Soleil said. He gave this guy a key to the borough hall? The personal indulgence that Adams has extended to Whitehead over the years is at odds with Adams's law and order public image. It's time for us to refocus our attention, not only as New Yorkers, but as Americans. The decent, innocent people who are the victims of crimes, not those who are committing crimes, the mayor said in October. With Whitehead, he has taken a different track. I was arrested at 15 years old. And because people embraced me when I was arrested, I embraced Lamor Whitehead, Adams said in 2016 after a Post article revealed that Whitehead had made false claims about collaborating with the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office and the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. As a Black man, I have an obligation to mentor other Black men that have had negative encounters in their lives, Adams said earlier this year, talking about Whitehead. The bishop lost his father, Arthur Miller was his name, in a police incident. The murder of Miller, a Bahamian immigrant and prosperous businessman who was choked to death by police officers in Crown Heights in 1978, was one of the most notorious acts of racism, police violence in New York City history. The Reverend Herbert Daughtry, a Brooklyn civil rights icon whom Adams has long considered a mentor, had helped to organize the community response. Later, Daughtry and other Brooklyn leaders would call for more young Black men to join the NYPD. Adams heeded the call. According to Whitehead, Miller's death was an inspiration for Adams to start 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care, an organization denouncing racism inside the police department. Arthur Miller had 4 children with his wife, Florence. Whitehead was born in April 1978, 6 weeks before Miller was killed, to another woman. When I first heard from this young man, I was in my 20s, Lolisa Miller Bradford, the youngest child of Arthur and Florence Miller, told me. Miller Bradford remembers that Whitehead called her in the early 2000s, claiming to be her half brother and saying that he'd heard her family had received settlement money after Miller's death. Whitehead hadn't received money, he told her, and he wanted some in order to buy a Toyota Camry. Miller Bradford said that she and her siblings offered to fly Whitehead to Florida, where they now live, to take a DNA test. He had declined. Hmm. In June 2014, Miller Bradford and her mother discovered that there had been a ceremony in Miller's honor on the block he was killed on. Adams and Whitehead had attended, and Adams had given a copy of an official proclamation about Miller to Whitehead. Florence Miller wrote an email to Adams. I do not want anyone using my husband's name or the tragic cold-blooded murder for publicity and or personal gain, she wrote. I was also informed, I'm not sure if this is fact or fiction, says the writer, that you are working with Pastor Whitehead on different endeavors, which is not of my concern. However, if any of those endeavors consist of the use of my late husband's name and or his tragic death, I am requesting it to be stopped. Miller Bradford received a call from Whitehead, who screamed at her. Then she got a call from Adams. Try to work this out, she remembers Adams telling her. I want to support your family. The call left the Millers feeling that Adams had unfairly taken sides against them, a feeling that has only intensified in the years since, as they've received word of his continued support for Whitehead. Mr. Adams has not supported anything that Arthur Miller's real family has done, Miller Bradford said. There were some who tried to warn Adams about Whitehead, and among those were Herbert Daughtry, now 92 years old. Daughtry has kept up with the Miller family over the years. When he first showed up, I was telling people, just be careful, Daughtry said of Whitehead. No matter whose son he is, if he's guilty of doing these things that they say he's doing, Arthur Miller's memory cannot give him cover. According to Soleil, who grew up in the church and was a minister himself, the message that Adams's treatment of Whitehead sent, particularly to the Black church community in Brooklyn, was that Whitehead could be trusted and that he had the backing of strong political forces, and that is how he was getting anywhere, Solis said. In the fall of 2014, Whitehead got approval to organize a gospel concert at the Barclays Center, the new arena in downtown Brooklyn. A press release for the event noted that the concert would benefit leaders of tomorrow, Brooklyn, and touted that Adams would attend as a special guest. Marquee names in the gospel world signed on, but behind the scenes, the planning was a mess. Whitehead repeatedly dismissed concerns about how he was raising money for the event and how he would market it. He kept saying, I have the support of Eric Adams, someone involved with the concert said. He just had no idea what he was doing. The Barclays Center ultimately canceled the event despite the $150,000 that Whitehead had raised in order to put on the show. Whitehead, through his lawyer, said that it was of his own decision to cancel the Barclays concert. The concert was the turning point in Whitehead's relationship with a number of associates, including his collaborator and roommate, Aurora Gordon. It was your bad attitude and your rush to have money, Gordon wrote to him in an email that November, explaining why the concert had fallen apart. She listed more than a dozen people who were supposedly falling back or distancing themselves from Whitehead. Whitehead responded defiantly, "For your information, Eric didn't fall back." That month, Adams and Whitehead attended a ribbon cutting at Forno Rosso, a pizza restaurant opened by the Petro brothers. By then, the brothers had pleaded guilty in their federal case. On November 10th, Robert Petro's lawyer submitted character testimonies to the judge who would sentence his client, including a letter from Whitehead, who claimed that the brothers were involved in an anti childhood obesity program he was running. Without the tireless efforts of Robert and Zane, this program would never have been offered, Whitehead wrote. I called Robert Petro and asked how he knew Whitehead. He was one of the customers that used to go to a restaurant that I managed, he told me. Never had anything to do with this guy's agenda. I don't know why he's linked us. When I reminded Petro of the letter Whitehead wrote to the judge on his behalf and asked if he remembered the childhood obesity program, he said, "Not me, but my brother did something. I don't recall. It was so long ago." By that point, Whitehead had got back into real estate. He offers online real estate classes to parishioners. One attendee told me that the classes solicited participants' personal data, including social security numbers and donations, which were termed love offerings. In early 2015, Whitehead's ex-wife, Aisha Williams, accused Whitehead and Andre Soleil of conspiring to steal the title to her house. In an official grievance with the state court system, in response, Soleil wrote the courts suggesting that Whitehead had acted on his own, stealing Soleil's notary stamp and forging a power of attorney in his law firm's office. Williams declined to comment. Gordon eventually kicked Whitehead out of her apartment. He responded by filing a lawsuit against her, prompting the affordable housing complex she lived in to investigate whether she'd been illegally subletting. Anguished, Gordon went to Adams to complain about Whitehead. Adams told her that he didn't want to get involved, according to her sister. Then Gordon went to Brooklyn's DA's office. Gordon told the DA that her understanding was that Adams had promised Whitehead money. I worked a year and a half for Lamor, believing he was in partnership with Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, who promised we would be funded by the end of the year. Gordon wrote in an email to the officer's senior executive for law enforcement operations. She told the office about the $150,000 that Whitehead had raised for the Adams-backed Barclays Center concert. The money had come from Ron Borowinski, one of the founders of a Brooklyn real estate company called My Ideal Property, which claimed to have flipped hundreds of millions of dollars worth of homes in the historically Black neighborhoods of central Brooklyn. Some of the company's operators were later indicted by the federal government for duping lenders and borrowers in real estate deals. Borowski was not criminally charged. The case is ongoing. In her email, Gordon said she had learned that Ingrid Lewis Martin, Adams's closest advisor, had tried to get Adams to stay away from Whitehead. Eric is not listening, Gordon wrote. He and Lamor are in business together. The Brooklyn DA's office ultimately pursued two investigations into Whitehead during Adams's first term as borough president. One investigation was based on the information supplied by Gordon. The other stemmed from Aisha Williams' house title allegations against Whitehead and Soleil. According to someone familiar with the office's operations at the time, Whitehead was one of the several people close to Adams whom the office looked into under Ken Thompson, the DA who had pledged to stamp out government corruption. Both investigations into Whitehead ended without charges. Federal authorities are generally seen as better equipped at conducting complex corruption investigations, the source said. A spokesman for City Hall told me that Adams never spoke to the Brooklyn DA about Whitehead. Gordon died in November 2020 of complications from the 19. We know what that is. According to her mother and sister, on at least one occasion, she spoke to the FBI about Whitehead. She kept records from her days of working with him, some of which they shared with me. To her last days, Gordon believed that Whitehead's arrest was imminent. Bozo, you're going to see, they're going to get him, she told a friend not long before she fell ill. On May 22nd, 2022, Daniel Enriquez, a 48-year-old researcher at Goldman Sachs, was riding the Q train when he was shot and killed by a fellow passenger. 2 days later, police arrested a suspect in the case, Andre Abdullah. Reporters gathered outside as NYPD precinct house in Chinatown, where Abdullah had been taken for a perp walk. Moments later, a gray Rolls-Royce SUV pulled up outside the precinct house. Whitehead got out of the car, wearing a Fendi blazer and a large Episcopal ruby ring. He told reporters that he had negotiated Abdullah's surrender directly with Adams. Abdullah's family had gone to Whitehead knowing that he had a relationship with the mayor and had requested his help. When asked about this at a press conference, Adams said, "All I wanted was this bad guy off the street, and whoever wanted to participate in a system that's doing so in any way, that's good enough for me." Christian Braun, Abdullah's attorney at the Legal Aid Society, told me that Whitehead's actions in the lead up to Abdullah's arrest were reckless. He could have gotten someone killed, she said. Initially, Whitehead had told her that he wanted Adams and Abdullah to come to his church where the mayor would personally take the suspect into custody. She said that Whitehead seemed to think that Adams was on board with this plan. Braun, who was already negotiating Abdullah's surrender with the NYPD, believes that Whitehead's intrusion alarmed the authorities, prompting officers to pounce on Abdullah, guns drawn, outside a legal aid office downtown, where he had gone to meet with Braun before surrendering. After Abdullah was taken away, Whitehead got into an argument with Braun. "Stay away from my client," she told him. And he responded, "What did you say, you dumb bitch?" Sounds like Whitehead. By that point, the FBI was already investigating Whitehead. Early one morning last spring, Brandon Belmonte of No Limit Auto Body met federal agents at a Kohl's parking lot in Paramus. They handed him a short stack of $100 bills, totaling $5,000 to give to Whitehead. Belmonte stuffed the bills in his left pant pocket. He then drove to Whitehead's house. He just kept talking, Belmonte said. He got more and more excited when he saw the money. He was like, I have the key to the city. Soon after, Whitehead asked Belmonte for a larger sum, $500,000, to renovate some apartment buildings in Hartford, Connecticut. When Belmonte didn't send him the money, Whitehead was livid. He said, You just lost City Hall, Belmonte said, and he started going crazy. In the weeks that followed, Whitehead would call him 30 or 40 times a day, shouting and cursing at Belmonte whenever he picked up. On July 24th, Whitehead's church was robbed. It was reported that Whitehead and his wife had been wearing between them two $75,000 watches, two $25,000 rings, and at least three crosses worth a combined value of $50,000. Speculation began to circulate online that the crime had been some kind of setup for an insurance payout. Whitehead spent the subsequent weeks in a frenzy, denying the accusations made against him, picking fights online. At one point, he threatened to beat up the comedian D.L. Hughley, rotating lawyers and trying to salvage his public image. Chief Madry, when this happened, he was over here in 10 minutes, he said at a press conference a few days after the robbery, mentioning the senior NYPD official, Jeffrey Madry, who had joined Whitehead and Adams at past events. In late September, after federal prosecutors in Brooklyn announced the arrest of two of the three men suspected of holding up Whitehead's church, the bishop claimed to have been vindicated. This is a win today because the narrative that was posted and presented was that I had something to do with this robbery, he told reporters outside Brooklyn Federal Court. I just really want to thank God. In December, Adams graded his performance during his first year in office as a B+. At a press conference after Whitehead's arrest, Adams was asked what grade he give the bishop as a mentee in light of the federal case against him now. First of all, the mayor said, I think that when you look at my work around mentoring and helping people, it's a fairly impressive one. Many of these young people have gone on to do some good things with their lives. But as for Whitehead, he should rate himself, Adams said. That's not my job to judge others. Adams declined to be interviewed for this article. A spokesperson for City Hall told me that the mayor and Whitehead have never worked together or made money together. He hasn't met with him since he became mayor, the spokesperson said of Whitehead. He's seen him from time to time at others' events where they both happen to be at. Whitehead also declined numerous requests to speak. A few days before he was arrested by the FBI, I waited for him outside the federal courthouse in Brooklyn, where there had been a hearing for the men charged in the church robbery. I'd find Whitehead's Rolls-Royce SUV parked on the street. Whitehead shook his head when he saw me and got into his car. Stop with those questions, he said. No, we never did no real estate. We never did anything. I never did one business transaction at all with Eric. After his last arrest, one of Whitehead's lawyers issued a statement indicating that the bishop denied all new charges against him. Whitehead was soon back to live streaming, and he hinted that he had damaging information to reveal about Belmonte. Belmonte has a criminal record and dates back to his early 20s. On New Year's Eve, Whitehead hosted his church's first in person event in several months. As midnight approached, he preached from the book of Job. Some 20 people attended. Outside the courthouse in Brooklyn, Whitehead had ended our encounter by driving away. I'd walked 2 or 3 blocks when I heard him shouting at me from his car across the street. He told me to meet him at the corner. He said he wanted to answer the question about Adams more fully. When I approached, he rolled down the window on the passenger side so that I could lean in. I want you to know, when you ask me about the mayor, I want you to understand that there is nothing, he said. He was a mentor. He's helped me as a man, and that's it. Then he drove off. Woo! That was a long read, everybody. Appreciate you for listening. I think it was a great insight as to their relationship and why he's always throwing around the mayor's name, even though he's not really not doing it anymore. So we are still awaiting his court dates. I'm sure that will be a very interesting time. What a time, what a time we will have. I am St. James, and this has been the Gospel according to St. James. Thank you for tuning in to the St. James Show. Please remember to like, subscribe, and fully support the channel. Have a good day.